February 28th, 1971, Sunday morning. Frank Lucas came downstairs wearing a navy suit, white shirt, thin tie. His shoes were polished, hair fresh cut. He looked like he was going to church. His wife Julie was in the kitchen making breakfast. Their 2 kids were still asleep upstairs. Frank poured himself coffee, kissed Julie on the cheek. She turned around, looked at him. "You're dressed early? Where are you going?" "Shopping." "What for?" "Something special." Julie set down the spatula, looked at him the way wives do when they know their husbands are about to do something stupid. "Frank, what are you buying?" "You'll see." He left before she could ask more questions. Drove to Morris Levy's Fur Emporium on 5th Avenue, Manhattan. The kind of store where you needed an appointment just to walk through the door. But Frank had called ahead. Morris was waiting. A small Jewish man in his 60s, thick glasses, warm smile. "Mr. Lucas, welcome. Please, come in." The store smelled like leather and money. Furs hanging on racks like artwork, mink, sable, fox. And in the back, on a mannequin under soft lighting, was the coat Frank had come to see. Full-length chinchilla, the color of smoke and honey, soft as water. The most expensive thing Morris had ever sold. Frank walked up to it, ran his hand along the sleeve. "How much?" Morris hesitated. "Mr. Lucas, this piece it's extraordinary. The chinchilla alone took 2 years to source. The craftsmanship is—" "How much, Morris?" $50,000. Frank didn't blink. "I'll take it." Morris smiled. "Would you like to try it on first?" Frank shook his head. "I know it fits." He pulled out a briefcase, set it on the counter, opened it. Inside were stacks of $100 bills, $50,000 in cash. Morris stared, then carefully counted every bill. When he finished, he wrapped the coat in tissue paper, placed it in a garment bag, handed it to Frank. "Mr. Lucas, may I say something?" Frank nodded. "Be careful with this coat. People will notice." "That's the point," Frank said. He drove home, hung the coat in his closet, didn't tell Julie, not yet. He'd wait until the right moment. March 8th, 1971, the fight of the century. Muhammad Ali versus Joe Frazier, Madison Square Garden. Frank had ringside seats, 2 of them. He'd invited his brother, but his brother canceled last minute, so Frank decided to go alone. That morning, he opened his closet, looked at the chinchilla coat hanging there, pulled it out, put it on. The weight of it, the softness, the way it made him feel, powerful, untouchable, like he'd finally arrived. He walked downstairs. Julie was in the living room, reading the newspaper. She looked up, saw the coat. Her face changed. "Frank, what is that?" Frank smiled. "You like it?" She stood up, walked over, touched the fur, then looked at him. "How much did this cost?" "Does it matter?" "Yes, it matters. Tell me how much." $50,000. Julie's hand dropped. Her voice went quiet. $50,000 for a coat? Frank said, "I can afford it." "That's not the point." "Then what's the point?" She looked him in the eyes. "The point is, this coat is a target. People are going to see you in this and wonder where you got the money. Cops, feds, rivals, everyone." Frank waved his hand. "You're worrying too much." "No, I'm worrying the right amount. Bumpy taught you to stay invisible. This coat makes you a billboard." Frank's jaw tightened. "Bumpy's dead, Julie. I'm not Bumpy." "I know, but you should still listen to what he taught you." Frank turned toward the door. "I'm going to be late." Julie stepped in front of him. "Frank, don't wear this tonight, please." "Why not?" "Because I have a bad feeling." Frank laughed. Not mean, just dismissive. "A bad feeling. That's your reason?" "Yes." Frank kissed her forehead. "I'll be fine. You worry too much." He walked out, got in his car, drove to Manhattan. Julie stood at the window, watching him go. She didn't move for 5 minutes. Madison Square Garden was packed. 20,000 people. The energy was electric. Everyone who mattered was there. Celebrities, politicians, mob bosses, athletes, high rollers. Frank walked in through the VIP entrance, the coat trailing behind him like a cape. People turned, stared, whispered. "Who is that?"
Look at that coat. Must be somebody. Frank felt their eyes, felt the weight of their attention, and he liked it. For 15 years he'd been invisible. Bumpy's driver, Bumpy's shadow. Nobody knew his name, nobody cared. But tonight, in this coat, he wasn't invisible anymore. He was somebody. He found his seat, third row, ringside, right next to the aisle. Perfect view of the ring, perfect view for everyone to see him. He sat down, draped the coat over the back of his chair, ordered a drink from a passing waiter, lit a cigarette, relaxed. 5 rows behind him, Carmine Tremonti sat with 3 men from the Lucchese crime family. Tremonti was in his 60s now, semi-retired, but still connected, still paying attention. He saw Frank, saw the coat, leaned over to the man next to him. "Who's that?" The man squinted. "I don't know." Tremonti watched Frank for a moment. "That coat cost 50 grand, easy, maybe more." The man said, "So?" "So," Tremonti said, "who's a black guy in Harlem with that kind of money to throw around?" The man shrugged. Tremonti kept watching. Across the aisle, 15 rows up, Nicky Barnes sat with his crew. 5 men, all of them dressed sharp, but none of them wearing anything close to what Frank had on. Nicky saw the coat before he saw Frank's face. Then Frank turned slightly. Nicky recognized him. Frank Lucas, Bumpy's old driver. Nicky leaned back in his seat, smiled. Not a happy smile. One of Nicky's men said, "That's Frank Lucas down there." Nicky said, "I know." The man said, "Look at that coat." Nicky said, "I'm looking." The man said, "He's doing well." "Too well," Nicky said. The fight started. Ali and Frazier went at each other like the world was watching, because it was. Frank barely paid attention. He was too aware of the eyes on him, the whispers, the looks. He'd wanted this, but now that he had it, something felt wrong. He couldn't name it, couldn't put his finger on it, just a feeling in his gut. The same feeling he used to get when Bumpy would go quiet, when Bumpy's silence meant danger. Frank pushed the feeling away, ordered another drink. The fight went 15 rounds. Frazier won by decision. The crowd erupted. Frank stood, put the coat back on, started walking toward the exit. As he moved through the aisle, people stepped aside, made room. A few nodded, a few smiled. Frank felt like a king. He didn't see Carmine Tremonti make a phone call, didn't see Nicky Barnes write something on a napkin and hand it to one of his men, didn't see the 2 FBI agents in cheap suits sitting in the upper deck, taking notes. Frank got in his car, drove home. It was almost midnight when he pulled into his driveway in Teaneck. The house was dark except for one light in the kitchen. Julie was still awake. Frank walked in, hung the coat in the hallway closet, went to the kitchen. Julie was sitting at the table, cup of tea in front of her, cold, untouched. How was the fight? Good. Frazier won. She didn't ask anything else, just looked at him. Frank poured himself a glass of water, drank it, then said, "You were right." About what? The coat. I shouldn't have worn it. Julie didn't say, "I told you so," didn't gloat, just said, "Why? What happened?" Frank sat down. Nothing happened, that's the problem. Nothing happened, but everyone saw me. She reached across the table, put her hand on his. Then, "Take it back, return it, get your money back." Frank shook his head. "Can't, already wore it." Julie pulled her hand back. "Then don't wear it again." Frank nodded. "I won't." But he didn't sound convinced. Julie stood up, kissed the top of his head. "Come to bed." Frank said he'd be up in a minute. He sat there in the kitchen, alone, thinking about the coat, about the looks, about the attention, about the feeling in his gut that wouldn't go away. March 10th, 2 days after the fight. Frank got a call at 9 in the morning. It was one of his suppliers, a man in the Bronx who moved product for Frank. "We got a problem." "What kind of problem?" "The Italians came by last night. Wanted to know who I was working for." "What did you tell them?" "I didn't tell them anything, but they're asking questions. About you. About where you're getting your supply. About how much money you're making." Frank's hand tightened on the phone. "Who came?" "Tremonti's people."
Frank hung up, called another contact. Same story. The Italians were sniffing around, asking questions. Then Frank got a call from a cop he had on his payroll, a sergeant in the Harlem precinct. Frank, you need to be careful. Why? Word is the feds are starting to look at you. Since when? Since this week. Someone called in a tip, said you're moving major weight, said you're making millions. The cop paused. You been showing off, Frank? Frank thought about the coat. No. Well, someone noticed you. Be smart. Lay low. Frank hung up, sat in his office, stared at the wall. Julie's voice echoed in his head. This coat is a target. She'd been right. The coat hadn't just made him visible, it had made him a question. And questions led to investigations. Investigations led to arrests. Arrests led to prison. March 12th. Frank was at a warehouse in the Bronx, checking on a shipment. His phone rang. It was his brother. Frank, where are you? The Bronx. Why? You need to get out of there, now. Why? What's going on? Nicky Barnes just sent 6 guys to that warehouse. They're looking for you. Frank's blood went cold. How do you know? Because one of them called me by mistake, thought I was you. They're coming to send a message. Frank looked around the warehouse. 3 of his men were there, unloading crates. Not enough if Nicky sent 6. Frank said, how long do I have? 10 minutes, maybe less. Frank hung up, told his men to pack up, fast. They threw the crates into a truck, drove out the back entrance. 5 minutes later, Nicky's crew showed up, found the warehouse empty. Frank drove to a safe house in Queens, stayed there for 2 days, thinking, calculating. Nicky was making a move. The Italians were asking questions. The feds were watching. All of it started the night he wore that coat. Julie had seen it coming. Frank hadn't, and now he was paying for it. March 15th. Frank went home, late, after midnight. Julie was asleep. He went to the closet, looked at the coat hanging there, pulled it out, examined it. There was a small tear on the left shoulder. He didn't remember that being there. Maybe it happened at the fight, someone brushing past him. Or maybe it happened later. Didn't matter. He hung the coat back up, closed the closet door, went to bed. Julie woke up when he slid under the covers. You okay? Yeah. Where were you? Queens. She turned over, looked at him in the dark. What happened? Frank was quiet for a moment, then said, You were right. About the coat. About everything. Julie didn't ask for details, didn't press, just said, I know. Frank said, I'm not wearing it again. Good. They lay there in silence, then Frank said, How did you know? Know what? That the coat would cause problems. Julie was quiet, then said, Because I know you, and I know this world, and I know that the moment you want people to see you, you're already in danger. Frank stared at the ceiling. I thought I was being smart, showing people I'd made it. You were being human, Julie said. Everyone wants to be seen. But in this life, being seen gets you killed. The next morning, Frank woke up early, went to the closet, took the coat out, put it in a garment bag, drove to Morris Levy's store, walked in. Morris looked up, smiled. Mr. Lucas, good to see you. Is everything all right with the coat? Frank set the garment bag on the counter. I need you to hold on to this for me. Morris's smile faded. Hold on to it? For how long? I don't know. Maybe a year, maybe longer. Morris unzipped the bag, looked at the coat. It's beautiful. I know. Then why are you giving it back? Frank said, I'm not giving it back. I'm just not ready to wear it yet. Morris studied Frank's face, then nodded. I understand. He took the coat, hung it in the back room. Frank left, drove home. Felt lighter. A week later, the feds raided one of Frank's stash houses, found nothing. Frank had moved everything 2 days earlier. A contact had tipped him off. The Italians backed off, stopped asking questions. Nicky Barnes made one more move, tried to muscle in on Frank's territory. Frank shut it down, quietly, efficiently. No violence, just strategy. By April, things were calm again. Frank was invisible again, operating the way Bumpy had taught him, in the shadows. No flash, no attention, just business.
Julie never mentioned the coat again, but Frank knew she was watching, making sure he didn't make the same mistake twice. And for 4 years, he didn't. He stayed quiet, stayed smart, stayed invisible, made millions, built an empire, became the biggest heroin dealer in New York without anyone knowing his name. Then, in 1975, Frank made another mistake. Not the coat, but close enough. He got comfortable, started trusting the wrong people, started thinking he was untouchable, and the feds finally caught him. When they arrested him, when they seized his assets, when they took everything, Frank thought about that coat, about the night at Madison Square Garden, about Julie's warning, about the moment he chose to be seen instead of staying hidden. That coat never got him arrested, but it started something. It put him on people's radar, made him a name worth investigating, made him a target worth pursuing. And 4 years later, when the feds finally built their case, that coat was part of the story, part of the evidence, part of the narrative that said Frank Lucas wasn't just a street dealer, he was something bigger, something worth taking down. In prison, Frank had a lot of time to think. He thought about Bumpy, about the lessons Bumpy had tried to teach him. Stay invisible. Don't show off. Don't let people see how much money you have. Frank had ignored that advice for one night, wore a $50,000 coat to a boxing match, and that one night set off a chain reaction that eventually destroyed everything he'd built. When Frank got out of prison in 1981, he went back to Morris Levy's store. The place was still there. Morris was older, grayer, but still alive. Frank walked in. Morris looked up, smiled, recognized him immediately. "Mr. Lucas, it's been a long time." Frank said, "I came for the coat." Morris's smile faded. "The coat? You still have it?" Morris hesitated, then said, "I'm sorry, Mr. Lucas. I sold it." "When?" 5 years ago. A man came in, offered me $60,000. I thought you weren't coming back." Frank nodded. "It's okay." "Who bought it?" Morris said, "I don't know. He paid cash, didn't leave a name." Frank stood there for a moment, then said, "It's probably better that way." Morris said, "Why do you say that?" "Because that coat was cursed." "Not really, but it felt like it." Morris smiled gently. "It was just a coat, Mr. Lucas." Frank shook his head. "No, it was a choice, and I made the wrong one." He left the store, never went back. Years later, in 2007, when Denzel Washington was preparing to play Frank in American Gangster, he asked Frank about the coat, about that night at the fight. "Why did you wear it?" Frank thought about it, then said, "Because I wanted to feel like I'd made it, like I was somebody." Denzel said, "And did you feel like somebody?" "For about 3 hours," Frank said. "Then I felt like a target." Denzel asked, "Do you regret it?" Frank was quiet for a long time, then said, "I regret a lot of things. The coat's not the biggest one, but it's the one I think about the most, because it was the moment I stopped listening to the people who loved me. Julie told me not to wear it, and I wore it anyway, because I thought I knew better." Denzel said, "What would you tell your younger self?" Frank said, "I'd tell him that being invisible isn't weakness, it's survival. And the moment you want people to see you, you've already lost." Frank Lucas died in 2019, 88 years old, natural causes. In all those years, he never wore another Chinchilla coat, never bought anything that expensive, never tried to show off again. He'd learned his lesson, but it took him 4 years in prison and losing everything to learn it. The coat was just fabric and fur, but what it represented was bigger. It was pride. It was ego. It was the belief that he'd earned the right to be seen, and in Frank's world, being seen was the most dangerous thing you could do. Julie lived until 2013, died at 79. In all those years, she never once said, "I told you so," never reminded Frank of that night, never brought up the coat. But Frank knew she remembered, knew she'd been right.
And sometimes, late at night, when they were both old and the empire was long gone, and all they had left was each other, Frank would say, "You tried to warn me." And Julie would say, "I did." And Frank would say, "I should have listened." And Julie would reach over, take his hand, and say, "You learned. That's what matters." The code ended up in a private collection somewhere, some rich man's closet, hanging next to other expensive things, worth more now than it was in 1971. But to Frank, it would always be worth exactly what it cost him, $50,000 and everything that came after.